Well, hello, everybody, and happy Monday. Welcome to the 145th episode of Stories of Service, ordinary people who do extraordinary work. And I am the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. And today we have another awesome guest. It's been a little while since I've been on, a whole week. I did a show in Oberammergau, Germany, as you guys saw last week. And so now I'm transitioning to a new guest, and we're going to be talking a little bit about addiction. So Matt Gardiner, how are you doing today?
Great, Teresa. Thanks for having me on. And, I know how much work goes into a show like this. So I just want to thank you for continuing to 145 episodes. That's a big accomplishment. So I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you. It's taken over a course of 3 years, but I am very proud of the show, and I'm happy and grateful for all the people who continue to join the podcast or want to be a guest or join us live or listen to the replay. So, and speaking of which, if you're on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. We do have the comments here. If you guys have a comment or a question, I'll try to incorporate it in the show. If not, we always do go back to the comments and try to answer them at a later time. But at this point, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Matt and what we're going to talk about, and then we're just going to get right into the questions. So, as I've shared with all of you, about two and a half months ago, I had a pretty stressful work week, and I had to face once again that drinking alcohol, that is not something that I can do casually. I know there might be other people who can do that, but because I do believe that I have somewhat of an addictive personality, it had gotten to a point where it was becoming a habit of 2 to 3 drinks a night to deal with stress. And so I decided at that point, after a very bad night of drinking and puking up blood, that it was time for me to quit alcohol altogether. And I have done that. And I've definitely felt better. I don't know if life is perfect just because you stop drinking. But I do know that for me, it was the right decision. And today we're going to talk more about drinking alcohol. We're going to talk about addiction in general, and we're going to talk about how we can go about and manage our emotions in a more healthy way. I have on here with me, I said, Matt Gardiner. He is a recovery coach who helps people get out of their stuck stories and manage their addictions to effectively integrate sobriety in their lives. His coaching method focuses on breath awareness, inner dialogue, word choices, and reframing the stories you've been attaching to the events of your life. As he says, change your story, change your life. Welcome again, Matt.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro. And yeah, congrats on your choice to go alcohol free as well. Thanks for sharing that as a great setup for this.
Awesome. Well, first off, I'm just going to ask, I always ask all my guests, usually I ask them, well, what inspired them to make a career out of the military? But since you're not a military guest, I'll just ask you, where were you born and raised? Tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. It's called like the northern capital of British Columbia. British Columbia being the provinces has Vancouver as the West Coast, which is where I'm situated now. Mm-hmm. But so yeah, born and raised Prince George, very blue collar. It's about 70,000 people, so a decent size. And drinking and just drug use was a big part of growing up. We call it pit parties. There's a lot of nature. It is a nice spot that way. But yeah, it was a little bit Wild West, right? I mean, I grew up in the 90s, right? I'm 43 this year, so child of the 80s. But I essentially grew up in the 90s as far as my transitional years into young manhood. Right. So that was it was definitely the Wild West, and we can get into that too. Like even when I got my first job, it was still people smoking weed on the breaks, you know what I mean? And like adults, and I'm like, this is the real world. I didn't realize that this was how people just act and interact. And so being a very shy kid, I found quite quickly that alcohol was there, and I use parentheses, at the time it was, to put his arm around me and go, hey, you don't have to be shy anymore. You just have a couple of drinks of me and you can go to any party. You can talk to those girls that you're like super shy around and this type of thing. So that was like what I thought was bridging the gap between my sort of, not social impairment, but just I was developing, right? I was, shy, very shy kid. So had a hard time, I wouldn't say making friends, but the friends I had, I was very close with, and then had a hard time sort of expanding out of that inner circle, if you will. One of the big turning points for me too, and I love to talk about just identity, like how you identify with yourself and my identity, was I was very much into sports until about 14, I would say. My parents got divorced at 13. And that's when sort of the veil, like I was a very happy, kid growing up, used my imagination a lot, and lived somewhat of a sheltered upbringing until then. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and it was almost like the veil had been pulled off after my parents got divorced and they started going at each other. And then it's revealed that my dad is drinking a lot more than he was letting on, and smoking weed and all this. And I was like, oh, okay, I got a whole different perception of him. And I grew up very quickly in those couple of years before they got divorced, which led me into getting out of sports and getting into music. And as soon as I got into music, it was like reading Led Zeppelin biographies and all of a sudden getting drunk all the time and destroying things. And, this drug use became, I'm like, oh, I'm going to start living this rock. It's cool, right? It's like, and especially when I'm like 16, I got some anger pent up because of the divorce, and I'm not really sure what's going on. And it's just, I think anger and frustration in teenagedom, if that's a word, go very much hand in hand. So that was kind of me figuring out who I was. And so I started drinking and smoking weed every day. Not drinking every day, but smoking weed every day. And that's, my identity was this like musician party guy that helped me start getting out into different social circles and kind of went from there.
Oh my God. It's just so similar to my story as a kid. It was, once I started finding alcohol, I felt like I found my friends. I found this tribe, and I thought this was what made me cool and what made me fun. Was if I was around these people who were drinking, everybody was enjoying themselves in the moment, and we were just living day to day. And it just became this compulsive routine where you would do it nonstop and there were no consequences. I could drink and I could still go to work the next day, and I would still earn money. And I would meet these great people in my mind anyway. I thought they were great people, and it just became this cycle. And it sounds like that was very similar in your background as well.
Definitely. Yeah. And that naturally led into, my young adulthood. As everything gets turned up, right? The idea of like working full time, paying my own bills, the need to make more money. I moved out of Prince George to Calgary, a bigger center, quickly moved to Edmonton, Alberta, which is about 1 million people. So everything's getting turned up. So as a result, my drinking got turned up as well. So that's when I turned the corner into daily use. And like you say, it sort of sneaks up, right? It becomes this habitual thing because of what I thought it was providing me.
Right.
Not realizing that, the needle starting to move into this more of a dangerous territory. But to your point, it's part of the way that the society conditioning, factors in. It's like this badge of honor. If you come in hungover, you're like, oh man, and you still made it in on 2 hours sleep. And that just and that not only just in the work environment, but just the whole rock and roll lifestyle. I was up till 3 a.m. playing a show, and
people think it's cool. Like
it's like cool. It's like
it's so cool because you're drinking.
It's viewed as like a strength. Like, wow, how did you pull that off? Right? And I'm like, oh, caffeine and and then having beer in the morning, like the hair of the dog and all this nonsense, right? And I thought that I was like, and then I'm like, look, my influences are like Hunter S. Thompson and all these guys that are cool in the movies, like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I'm like, yeah, this is me in my 20s, and pretty much was, right? I'm getting into like psychedelic mushrooms a few times a week. Before microdosing was a thing, I was doing that like 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes with mushrooms, and I thought that was living, man. And just kind of kept going with that. I ended up hospitalizing myself at 27 for overdoing alcohol. Acute pancreatitis, incredibly painful. I spent like 3 days in the hospital, and that was one of these what should have been turning point, or could have been, I should say, turning point. And I remember just like what I thought was my death, but I had no idea what was going on. I'm just like, I remember just praying. I'm like, if I get out of it, I'll never drink, never touch another drop, right? And literally Teresa, as I'm walking home, because I'm in Alberta, it's like sort of the Texas of Canada, we call it. And there's like a liquor store posted up almost every street corner. I was in the university area, so big party area. And it was like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I walked by the first liquor store. I'm like, I'm done with you. Like, ooh, I felt pretty good. Walked by the second liquor store. I'm like, oh, that's the negotiations are going on in my brain. I'm like, well, technically that was whiskey that did that to me. There is other drinks.
Always like
bargaining, right? And then by the third liquor store, I'm like, I'm a beer drinker. Nobody ever has problems with beer. Let's just go have a few beers. And then I brought beer home and then became a beer drinker for the next 4 or 5 years. And that more or less led me for the next, I'd say until the early 30s is when I had my first lengthy sobriety stint. So, but I just want to leave it there if there's anything else you wanted to discuss before we got into that.
Well, it's just interesting how you were able to see, like, and I've noticed the same thing. There's literally no consequences or no bad things that happen from most nights of drinking.
Right.
And that's the problem,
It
is that
is. Yeah.
you get these like repeated nights of good times and of dopamine and just
Yeah.
good social vibes with people. And that would go on for so long.
Yeah.
And then in my story, there's always this culminating night, like I just had, where I puked up blood and got gastritis. But I can tell you, like, the 2 years that I've been stationed here, that I've been drinking pretty routinely at night, maybe one or two.
Yep.
I have no consequences other than the fact that it probably didn't allow me to work out as hard as I could have.
Sure.
It didn't maybe work well with some of the food, but it didn't have any really major consequences until I lost control.
Yeah.
Until that one night, I'm at a command event. It always is like this, where I feel awkward and I'm not comfortable in a group setting, and I drink too much, and I don't even realize that I'm out of control.
Yeah.
And it's happened too many times now for me to ever go back at this point.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
It's just crazy how sneaky alcohol is.
It's so insidious, and it is a very, very, very sneaky, and it finds very opportunistic, right? And it's, I guess that segues into just, I had 3 years sober, right? I hit one of your, like what you were mentioning, like it's a rock bottom moment, if you want to call it that, or just very much a low point where
it's not even a rock bottom. It's just something that you go, okay, I'm done.
I would safe to say it was a rock bottom. It was pretty bad. I was in very rough shape. I ended up taking 5 weeks off work just to sort of to dry out. There's some other stuff that factored in, but it was all centered around my lack of control in drinking. So we'll just say that. And I was about halfway through that 5 weeks, and I was on this big binge, and it was basically, okay, it was the crossroads. It was officially, I got to go one way or the other. I'm just going to keep doing this. I got some money saved up. I can go on this massive bender, and that's all she wrote, essentially. And I was thinking this, right? Very dark spot. Or I can at least try. And like, I haven't fully tried it, as in go to an AA meeting. I haven't fully put my hand up and asked for help to all my resources. I told work I needed some time off, but aside from that, I had no real plan, obviously. And one of my buddies took me to an AA meeting. He'd been through NA and AA. And he took me, I said, man, can you just take me to one of these things? And that's what it was, right? And, a lot of people say a lot of things about AA, myself included. I'll always have one foot in AA, simply because it literally saved my life. That one meeting that I went to with Brent, that was my buddy's name, it saved my life. Just going into what I thought it was going to be versus what it actually provided me was literally night and day. I went in there, and just the community, and like everybody's like chipper. And I know there's like obviously different experiences. Sometimes you go in there and it is the stereotype of everybody's kind of the dry drunk and all that. It was nothing like that though. For me, I went in there and everybody was like cheerful, and all different age groups and sort of walks of life, if you will. And I was like, holy shit, everybody's high-fiving each other and hugging. I'm like, this is not what I was expecting at all. And I remember the guy opened with just whatever the opening, verbiage that's read. And I started tearing up, and I literally felt a weight come off my shoulders. And I was completely changed from then on. Like, I was hopeless up to that point, like just drinking night and day. So that really saved me. And then those next 3 years, I got into like a lot of personal development and stayed the course. And then, it was like, I think it was like, again, like getting back to the subject of the thread that we're talking about, how insidious and how just sneaky it is. There was this I left the door open just a crack, even that 1%, there was a little bit of daylight there. And it was at my buddy's wedding, and I'd been a groomsman for him, and there was these drinks coming in. I wasn't super protective. I was still hiding the fact that I wasn't drinking. I don't really know why. I guess it was just, I didn't want people to know.
Well, I think there's a little bit of shame associated.
Right. There was some shame still, right? So along with the shame, there was the crack in the door. There's some daylight coming in. And finally, I got to the end of the night. It was like midnight. And then finally, like, I was literally taking shots and just pretending, like, watering the plant behind me. And finally, I took a shot of tequila. And I was just like, I got this. Like, I can have and like, snap of the fingers, it was like the old party mat came online. And that's what I mean. It was so opportunistic. The alcohol was like, no, come on. It's midnight. It's your buddy's wedding. All these you're fine. You got this, right?
Yeah.
it's just a drink. And as soon as I finished that shot, I'm like, oh, I missed this. And then I went and grabbed a Corona. And then before you know it, after the wedding, I'm driving around the neighborhood looking for the liquor store that's still open till 2 a.m. Because I've been out of the game for a while. So I'm like, hey, which one's still open? And I've got this adrenaline rush. And I'm like, I kind of missed this like reckless, you know what I mean? I didn't find a way to sort of satiate that, like, because I'm so disciplined in every other aspect of my life, for the most part, only human on some parts of it too, right? But for the most part, very consistent and disciplined. So alcohol was that like, okay, fuck it, I just get to let my hair down and you know what I mean, and breathe for a bit. Right. So and I never found a way at that point. I hadn't found a way to satiate that like recklessness, that inner teenager, you know what I mean? Like, oh, let's do this. Woo, and so I went back to it, and I tried for 4 years. It was just insanity, trying to moderate and prove to myself and to others, but mainly myself, that I could drink like a normal person, whatever that is, and we can get into that, of course. And just every moderation technique known to man, tried those. 0% success rate. It would always just end in binge drinking, which to me was harder on my body and just on my emotional and just my view of myself, far harder on myself than just drinking every day. Cause I'm like, at least I knew where I stood. I'm like, you know what I mean? I've resigned myself. This is again, my identity. Whereas before I was like, no, I'm not a drinker. I'm a normal drinker, and flip-flopping and breaking trust with myself constantly for 4 years. It was just complete hell. So moderation and this idea of normal drinking was like complete insanity for me. And then, finally, I'm coming up on, a little over 5 years now. And it was really based on what happened is my dad passed away. He was a lifelong drinker for the time and I was very much on that same path, right? He was 66. He'd been retired for a year. And, this concept of retirement being like, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And this is my opinion on it. I truly believe he didn't really plan for it. And again, his identity, he was a fireman for 35 years. So at the end of that, he's a golfer, but so he's golfing a lot, but that means he's drinking more and he's took up smoking cigarettes. It's like his idea of retirement ended up just really affecting his physical and mental health to the point he had like a year to enjoy his retirement, and he passed away. And so I was on my way to celebration of life for him. And it was one of these things like you talk about, just the confluence of events. I was coming out of this weekend. I've been up all night, partying really hard, cocaine, like cigarettes, beer, did everything. Right. And I'm super hungover and I'm like having suicidal thoughts. Meanwhile, I'm going to pay tribute to my dad. And I'm like, what am I doing? Yeah. And then I just asked for help. I brought out my cell phone. I'm just recording my own voice and just going, hey, like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I need help, blah, 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 just to get that stale energy moving. Right. And something happened similar to like the AA meeting I went to the first time. Different though, similar in the fact that like there was some kind of spiritual intervention, where I went from one of the darkest spots I'd ever been in into this like solution focused mindset. I'm like, hey, I've been here before. I'm going to do it again. The lineage of alcoholism on my dad's side of family can and will stop with me. And it's going to be like a living tribute to dad. And, out of that, I after pulling alcohol out of my life entirely again, and just resolving myself, like I'm a non-drinker now. I'm not going to go back to it. Right. That's what all of a sudden, turning 40, I have I guess what they used to call midlife crisis, but existential crisis. Like, why am I actually here? Like, I like the job that I'm in. I've been doing it since I was 16. So I've been working at a grocery store.
What is your work, by the way? Just
pardon me?
What was your work?
So I worked at it's a Western Canadian grocery chain called Save On Foods. So it's kind of similar to, it's not like one of those big box stores, a little bit smaller, but it's fairly big. So like I got from part-time bakery closer, right, when I was 16 years old, working 4 nights a week after high school, and climbed the ranks over 23 years to assistant store manager. So I've been assistant store manager for 6 years. I've been a bakery manager, kind of all the spots in between as far as like just naturally climbing the ladder, which was great because it really got me out of my shell. There was a lot of great stuff that I learned from it. But then as soon as it was basically the crossroads was, I remember telling myself, Teresa, I'm like, okay, all I have to do is this for another 15 years and then I'm good. And this is after I pulled alcohol out of my life. And every time I did it, I felt very contracted. I felt this like dread. And I was like, damn, like, what is this feeling? So I investigated. I'm like, is there something else I want to do? And how am I going to pull that off anyways? Right. And it really is just a matter of just following intuition. And, it's been, I'd say about 3 years that I've really been experimenting with that. And, it's not something that happens overnight for sure. I've been doing sober coaching for 2 years, but I didn't even know I wanted to do that initially. So I just pulled myself out of my job I took a 6-month sabbatical. I'd saved up enough money that I could take myself out of that under the guise I was just going to hit the reset button and go back and do the next 15 years. Right. And it would have been so easy for me to continue that had I just been the cycle of come home, numb out, have a few beers, go to work the next day, come home, have a few beers. I could have done that for another 15 years. No problem. Well, maybe not no problem, but you get what I mean.
Right.
Versus like pulling it out and going, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, it's nothing to get, like, I'm not saying I'm better than it or anything. It's just not, there's something inside of me that's telling me I should be doing something different. Right. So it's worth exploring. Sure. So I did that. And so after actually, it's an interesting story. The first morning of my sabbatical, I had, I don't know if you ever get this, like a voice in your head that's not really like, it feels like different. It's not yours. You know what I mean? It's like, it was like I think it's like my grandpa or something, like one of my spirit guides, whenever that, said, you're not going back. And the implication being you're not going back to your previous job. I was like, interesting. I never even considered that. I was always going to go back and what do you mean I'm not going back? Right. So that, to me, that was like a signal. And I got one of those, it was a sign. Oh, yeah. And totally. I had that same voice a little bit later on, right before I finally just resigned from the job entirely and transitioned to full-time coach. And it was just said, your future is through your past. And for me, it was like, again, sort of like enigmatic, but enough to get my attention. And go, what does this mean? And so to me, that is when I found my niche. I'm like, okay, well, my past is very much rooted in substance abuse, right? So my future is through my past. So the one thing that I have some expertise in and massive life experience is getting inebriated. You know what I mean? So I can speak all day, every day on that, and also getting out of that into a life that I want to live, and then I'm helping other people with.
Wow, Matt, that is such a touching story. I mean, even like my LinkedIn, I'm getting a lot of like LinkedIn people who are also identifying with it. I can't see the names, but as an alcoholic, I know we strive to reach that perfect drunk drink.
Yeah.
And then the same person said, I'll have 19 years on the 29th.
Congrats.
Congratulations.
19 years. That's badass.
And then another guy is joining the call and just says very good. And then I had another who said, as a proud member of AA, it's never the first drink, it's the first sip. Yeah.
Yeah.
So true. It's so true. It's just like the minute you have it, you're like, oh, and then there's some nostalgia there too, Matt. Like every time you drink, you think, oh, it brings you back to, especially if you were a drinker as a young person, it brings you back to those stories. And the thing that is so, like we say, is so insidious about alcohol is that the hangovers, especially I found as you age, they are definitely much worse.
Yeah,
but
much worse.
The actual act of drinking can be a very positive experience. And I don't think that there's a lot of people who acknowledge that. But that's the reason why it has such a hold on us.
Yeah.
Is because there's a lot of things that do happen to your body and to you where you feel, at least in the moment, that you're being the best version of yourself. You probably aren't. You're probably annoying the shit out of people around you. At least I know I do. And, you're probably being super pushy and overbearing. Totally. But in the moment, you think you're like the greatest person ever.
Right. The inhibitions are just peeled right off, and you're like, "This is me," right?
Yeah.
No, it's totally worth. That's a topic worth mentioning. Like you say, not too many people get into that, especially when you get on the other side of the fence. And I want to be clear. There is part of me that's envious of, like, I remember Russell Brand is not necessarily my favorite all the time, but like he had a quote that was like, I'm jealous of the old version of me because that version still gets to do drugs and alcohol. Right. I'm like, yeah, you know what? If all things are the same, and that's why I never judge anybody. I don't think I'm better or worse. Right. I'm just, I'm on this path. Right. And because the cons far outweighed the pros. But to your point, I remember, it's funny you mentioned this. I remember writing out a pros and cons list because I was getting very conscious about my drinking, especially in that moderation 4 years moderation attempts of 4 years that I had. And I was writing out the cons list and the pros list. And the only pro that came up was I enjoy doing it. I was like, literally, I couldn't think of any other reason. And then there was like pages, like 3 pages of cons. I'm like, this is kind of strange, isn't it?
Expensive. It makes me feel like shit. I'm losing control and saying or doing something that I regret the next day.
Absolutely.
Mean,
all the above. And, you know, the person that commented, it's not about the first drink, it's first sip. I started noticing that big time, right? Like it would be, and let's get into the environment part of it too. Cause like basically, I wasn't bringing alcohol home. That was sort of like a moderation technique that I used. So, but then all of a sudden I'm going out pretty much every night after work. So which is like triple the cost because you're throwing in shitty food that you're eating at like, you know, pub or whatever too. So I go there and, you know, it's like, you know, even now my brain is going, ooh, I kind of, you know, me talking about it, right?
I know.
It's like the frosty pint, right? And it's like, you just had your day of work and it's like, okay, here we go. And the first sip, I remember, I'm going to be very conscious about this. Like, how is it reacting with my nervous system, the dope, the brain chemistry, etc. And I had that sip and I remember my pupils would dilate and I kind of get like a bit of goosebumps on the arms, right? But then everything was downhill from then because like, before I would just, I still do. Like when I have a drink, my brother always makes fun of me because he's like, you drink like you haven't had a drink in days, like regardless if it's water or whatever. Since I was a kid, I've always just slammed it back. I don't know what it is, but so that's what I would generally do with alcohol as well. So I was getting to this point where like, no, I'm going to, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just going to try and consciously enjoy this beer. And by the end of the beer, I just kind of have this like headache, you know what I mean? I feel sluggish. Right. I'm like, why would anybody just have one beer? Right. And then I'll be okay, well, keep them coming sort of thing. Right. But
then that's the thing is like, I would look at the person that was sitting and having like one drink of wine and just enjoying the evening. And I'd be like, wow, I wonder what that's like.
Right.
I don't have that. I don't have that feeling.
Yeah.
When I have one, I'm like, I think I can have maybe 2.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes like this thing where I have to force myself to stop because I don't want to feel like shit the next day.
Right. And then like, what's the fun in that? You know what I mean?
Right.
And actually getting back to your, you know, the chasm or the delta between like how we feel versus how we're actually coming off. Right. And like you say, because the inhibitions are peeled off, feel like so much more assertive, but in fact, you're like kind of being annoying, or I'm being annoying.
You're being annoying.
And I'm like, exactly. And I'm like, you know, voicing my opinion, but it's like through this like real negative distortion, you know, of like, almost like an arrogance or an very ego driven, we'll say, right? Where it's like, I would, without the compassion or empathy that I normally have as a person, it's just like, no, this like brash way of speaking. That's just not me at all. And, you know, a lot of the embarrassment that I look back on is like, oh man, I was just being such a dick. But I you know, I thought that was the way that I could be my true self and speak my opinion. And like, thank God that's not my true self.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and what it is, I believe what it does is it exaggerates any part of your personality.
Definitely.
So all those things are in you, but it taking away those inhibitions are there to help you get along with other people. And they're there to help protect you. They're there for a reason. And when you take all those things off, you don't become a better version of yourself. I find you just become an exaggerated version.
It's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
And it doesn't serve you. It doesn't serve the people around you. And then, like you say, we've discussed, there's this entire culture around it where it's glamorized. And when you start to peel back the layers on that, the way I look at it is I say, well, who does that serve for it to be glamorized? Like, who's benefiting by alcohol being such a accepted thing to do and being such a cool thing for us all to go do? Oh, it's benefiting the liquor companies.
I was going to say the alcohol companies for sure.
Right. You know, the people who are spending their time getting drunk every night, I bet you they're not, you know, at Congress advocating for protection policies. And I bet you they're not holding signs in front of stores and advocating for change. No, I bet you they're not doing the good work of society and being good civil leaders. And so I think to myself, I think there's definitely forces at play that want us to be high and that want us to not be engaged.
Absolutely.
And that was also part of what played into my decision to stop drinking is like, do I want to be do I want to be unconscious? Do I want to not
that's
be
what
in
it is.
control?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's worth mentioning, we could say it's like, yeah, it can get a little matrixy or conspiracy theory, but it really isn't though. Like because that was my choice. I could have either just quote unquote fallen in line and just done, the model employee for the next 15 years and having my drinks at the end of the night. And, I don't want to say again, I'm not judging anybody that does that. Right. I'm just saying it wasn't for me. There was something inside of me that was going like, no, there is something more. It's worth exploring, if nothing else.
Right.
Right. And it was absolutely, but yeah, to your point, it's like it for sure. It definitely benefits. And you think of how ingrained that was in like 50s culture, right? It was like the guy comes home and it was smoking too. And that's why like I love the way that and it's like, I'm gonna have my whatever scotch on the rocks, right? And that was just synonymous with like a work day, right? For generations.
And who does that benefit? That benefits
Right.
like Francesca Graham. She's a lawyer, former Army officer, and she says advocate for lapdog. And she's on this Walk the Talk Foundation. They do a lot of work on behalf of trying to hold the military accountable for some of their problems in the military justice system with the Inspector General report. And doing that kind of network is you need to not just be a person that goes in, clocks out, and comes home and drinks their beer. And the thing is that I really do believe that's part of ingrained into the culture, because it kind of keeps people boxed in and doing just one thing all the time and not wanting more. And like you said, you finally questioned it and said, is this really what I want to be? And this is really where I want to go.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. And then just from there, I've grown, felt like I've grown so much. And, granted, there was a few steps backwards, say financially. But I was able to navigate that because I'm clear-headed, because I know what I'm doing is centered and it's coming from a spot of selfless intention. You know what I mean? And it's an ego check on a daily basis, right? Because in my opinion, to be a coach or to serve anybody, it's not about me, right? I can bring up certain context of like how I've, gotten from here to there. But other than that, I'm putting my focus on somebody else and other people. And that was really very much a missing ingredient in my previous way of being, right? And removing alcohol very much pointed me in that direction and allowed me to expand in that direction that I wouldn't have otherwise. It was on the periphery, right? And I think that's the point, and it's worth mentioning too. I think, and I imagine it was for you, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. There is something, if we listen to it, that we know that we're either meant for more, and it's usually something that's sort of out on the periphery. It's like the one day I'll get to this, or it's I'd love to do that, but like, and then there's some kind of story attached to it. There's like limitation story, and damn, alcohol loves that shit. It just like, it latches onto that, and then it's really hard to get beyond that barrier, right? Of like, I'm meant for more, and the alcohol's like, no, you're fine, just have another drink, you know what I mean?
Yeah, just enjoy yourself
and just enjoy it.
Done that you want to get done because it's easier, and
it's easier is what it comes down to.
It really is. And
sure.
I think that for me, my big passion is transparency, having open conversations, doing the show now, and being able to do these interviews and have what I've had, and it hasn't been easy. But if I had continued to just drink it away and just think every night, oh, I'll just get drunk, then how many more things am I not accomplishing?
Right.
And that also goes into, once you do decide to quit drinking, a lot of times what will happen, and I found it even within myself, and you can probably talk to this too, is that how do you control not developing another addiction? Because you get to that place where you've stopped the alcohol, but now you still have those compulsions
100%
to do things, and anything can become an addiction. Anything that you're doing, working out, eating. So how do you control? How have you found that? How have you managed?
I love that topic, right? And it's worth mentioning. So the first thing I'd say on it is important to, it's like Indiana Jones, that movie where he takes the one, you're displacing something with the other. It is important to replace the mechanics of the habit of just having a drink in your hand with something healthier, right? Having said that, have it in your mind or in the forefront of your mind that after you can get, depending on where you are with drinking, whether it's like you're drinking 20 beers a day or 2 beers a day, you'll be on a different timeline with this. But just say for the first 30 days, you're really focused on just keeping the drink out of your hands. So if you have a replacement habit, I started going to the gym, and specifically on the times that I would be going to the pub, I was going to the gym. So then I'm still getting sort of like that dopamine, like the natural brain chemistry, not ramped up like you would from alcohol, which is a good thing, because you got to remember you get an equal and opposite dopamine deficit, the hangover and the anxiety, right? So I'm glad that, with working out, you get much more gradual and natural, and then you have a soft landing coming down from it, right? So that's what I did, was replacing it with working out. Now, I didn't realize the first time that I had done that, I still wasn't registering the uncomfortable feelings. I thought I was, but I wasn't. So that is the second thing, what you're mentioning here. And this is something that was much more advanced. And that's why I love talking about it, is I didn't even notice it until the second run of sobriety, these 5 years that I've been in. I was in about, I would say like 2.5. This is probably the last couple of years I've been really working on this since I became a coach full time. Because again, I can only go as deep with my clients as I go with myself, right? So I'm sort of the guinea pig. So, and that's what it was. I realized, especially when I'm starting my business and I don't really know what I'm doing, you know what I mean? I had some business coaches and all that, but there's so many pathways you can go. And you're just like, hey,
I'm looking at with podcasting,
right? Right. And that's so funny. And it's like, okay, so that became my addiction, was like the work, the busy work. So anytime there was like self-doubt, and by the way, a great quote, just a quick segue, if anybody's like gone into their own business or whatnot, a friend of mine, a mentor of mine, had mentioned entrepreneurship or freelancing is essentially like the ultimate self-development program, because you're confronted with like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, all that stuff on like a daily basis, right? Like, is this for me? When I'm so used to getting a steady paycheck and being part of a cog in a wheel of a company, right? And then I'm out and exposed, and it's all on me. Very different situations. So I say that to say that became my whenever these feelings had come up, I push them back down with distractions. So distractions were like busy work. I'd have 5 browsers open. And finally, I just called myself out on my bullshit. I'm like, man, this is like the same mechanics. Instead of grabbing a beer, I'm just going to the computer. I'm lifting my phone up. And that became my addiction, my replacement addiction. And that was truly what was preventing me from investigating these uncomfortable emotions that I had, 20 years worth of arrested development on, practice becoming competent, feeling lonely, feeling sad, feeling all of these uncomfortable. I don't want to say negative, but they're uncomfortable.
Anxieties,
like
not good enough, comparing yourself to other people,
comparison, judgment, all of those, right? That were very much distorted and or numbed or escaped from alcohol. I then basically handed the torch. Instead of alcohol, it's like distraction and busy work. So
posting on social media. I mean,
right. And then still like wanting external, it's like I'm doing everything to sort of turn away from myself. And it's like somebody, also another mentor of mine, had mentioned, it's like the difference between, if your child comes up to you and goes, hey, I'm feeling anxious. Oh, well, let's take you outside to the neighbors. But providing distractions. You go, oh, well, why are you feeling that way? Right. But I wasn't doing that with myself, and I wasn't finding help to do that with myself. I was just, oh, well, you're feeling that way. Well, let's go do something else. So you don't, we're distracting you from feeling that way instead of just investigating it. Right. So, so that's honestly, that to me, it's like the triage of recovery is obviously get the drink out of your hand, or the drug or whatever it is that you're addicted to, get that out of your hand and work on that initially. But then the long game that you play with that is the emotional sobriety part, right? And like learning how to actually cope properly. And depending on how long you've been doing a certain addiction, picture, like I say, 20 years of arrested development on gaining a competency or being able to cope with uncomfortable emotions is essentially what I'm dealing with now.
Right. And it's living in the day to day, and then understanding that sometimes you are going to have those days where, like I call them, I was saying them before the call, you could kind of go down these rabbit holes and you just turn over the same issue over and over again in your head. and you're not really solving the problem.
Sure.
I mean,
It's dwelling. You're dwelling on it. Yeah.
you're dwelling on it and thinking
Yes.
about it some more. And it's probably keeping
Yeah.
you, or at least for me, it keeps me up at night,
Yeah.
and then I don't sleep
Yeah.
over some problem that I have zero control over, that I'm not going to fix or solve.
That's the key there.
But
Yeah.
it's one,
Yeah.
especially as an advocate. If you're somebody who likes to work on policy change, or you're somebody that wants to fix the system, well, guess what? You're not going to fix the system in a day, or in a 2 or 3 or 4. And even when you do get a victory as an advocate, you might get one law passed, but then it's not going to be enforced properly. And then so there's this whole other thing that happens afterwards. So
yeah,
it's one of those things where I think that for me, and you can say if this is how it is for you, but I've just learned to basically try to have a sense of humor about it, and then accept that sometimes you're just going to have to live with shitty feelings for a few hours.
Totally.
That's the way it is.
100%. And that's okay, right? Just give yourself permission. It's fine. You don't have to. Yeah, that's absolutely. Being accepting of these, like, and just, it's not, they aren't, to me, it's like, it's not good or bad, right? They're just uncomfortable. And that's fine, because working out is uncomfortable, but there's benefit to it, and you feel better afterwards, right? So just, it's really, again, it's when we mentioned in the bio there, like part of my bio is word choice, and words do matter, right? You can change the energy of a sentence by plucking one word out and putting something else in there, right? Pressure language, removing pressure language, allowing yourself.
I'm still here. I'm going to get on my other camera though.
For sure.
Keep going.
Yeah. But yeah, just I mean, allowing yourself to feel those feelings, right, is so key. And so that's for me. And like in getting more curious about it, as opposed to I guess feeling some kind of shame. Yeah, I like to mention this actually. It's like this phrase called the second arrow. So when somebody has, say, for example, like a slip up, if you have, I guess, like a relapse or whatnot, and then immediately your first reaction is like, damn, I'm such an idiot. Why have I done this? And so you've already had this like acute, what you can take as like a learning experience, but then you're like shit talking yourself on top of that. And so for me, it's like removing, avoid the second arrow. It's just, and that is what you say about like going down the rabbit hole and putting all your focus on what you don't want. Because if you're putting your focus on like this, the slip up, as opposed to like, you're essentially attracting that in. And if you're saying like, I don't want this anymore, you're telling the universe, give me more of it, because your focus is still going on what you don't want. If you get what I mean, like regardless if you say a negation of a don't, I can't, your energy still goes there. So regardless if you're saying, I don't want this, which your implication verbally was, I want this, but you're not saying that. You're saying, I don't want this. So your attention is still on what you don't want. And therefore you're pulling more of that into your life. So for me, it's about like pivoting quickly, but still giving yourself enough time to be curious about, why am I feeling uncomfortable? Curiosity versus like, I'm such an idiot, and just like defaulting to like shit talking yourself. Give yourself some grace, some acceptance, and just realize, to your point, like any emotion, it's just like a weather front. It's going to pass. So while you're in it, why not, like, you know what I mean? Learn something about yourself, journal it, call a friend. If you have a coach, that'd be when you reach out to them, text them, or a therapist, or whatever it may be. And then notate it. And then from there, it's okay. I've gotten that out of my head. I've got it on a piece of paper, whatever it may be. I've meditated on it. Now I can shift my focus back to what I do want, right? Pivot. Exactly.
Because it's a balance. It's a balance between feeling it and not dwelling in it.
100%.
And you have to understand what the differences are in that. Because there is that time where, okay, you can't just lay in bed for 5 days feeling sorry for yourself over something. But then at the same time, you have to give yourself the time to grieve and to cry, or to have an ugly cry over it, or whatever it is you need to do to process that emotion. And I think that's just life, and that's the suck of life. A lot of people, I don't think, understand that that's like what is going to happen, where we're going to deal with hard things. We're going to deal with things that we don't want to talk about, or things that are uncomfortable.
You're nailing it. I'm loving this conversation. It's going by far too quickly. I love it. All the topics are just like such wonderful topics. Like we scripted this out, but honestly, it's just got a natural flow to it. I love it. Yeah, absolutely. It's that is life, right? And it's totally cool, right? Life is contrast, and just
Mhm.
it's remembering, it's becoming more centered and remembering everything sort of
Right.
on this spectrum, and realizing that like the uncomfortability and my ability to feel into that and not dwell on it, to your point, like just going in
Mhm.
there, okay, what can I learn from this? Boom. Then recalibrating and going to the other side of the spectrum. That's life, right? And
It
there
is.
are challenges. Problems are a sign of living, right?
Right.
It's, you know, you,
And
yeah,
we all
you
have them.
need that contrast. Life is literally is contrast, light, dark. And to your point, like finding that balance. And how are you going to find that balance if you're distorted with shit that you're putting into your body that really distorts your perspective on everything,
It
right?
does. It
Or
does.
you know, and actually, sorry, just while I'm thinking of it, you know, one of the biggest realizations I had is one of the reasons I thought drinking was benefiting me was my chase of being in the present moment. Because I thought by having this beer at this
Yeah. Oh,
time at
yeah.
this pub, the culmination of the day, here it is, I'm in this moment now. So I truly believe that it was my, what I thought was my gateway to being in this present moment right here with this beer, with my family, with my, you know, my friends, my wife,
Yeah.
whatever it is that
Yeah.
cheers. That is the present moment. And that's why we romanticize it so much, right? And it's just remembering it's not, it's everything else. It's so funny that we, again, it's what you get, what more you focus on. If you're focusing on the beer is sort of like the pinnacle of that. And the only reason it's like that is because of the artificial peak in dopamine. It 4x's your dopamine, right? So the point you're just, oh, so of course that's what your brain is like, that's the moment there. No, it
Yeah.
isn't. It's like
Mhm.
the fact that I'm sitting across from my beautiful wife, we're making eye contact, have a smile on each other's faces.
Right.
It's nice outside. You can still enjoy all of that. In fact, that is what I put the focus on now. And when people are like, well, I can never have fun camping anymore. No, camping's exactly the same. It's just, you're not going to be bombed by like 8 p.m. You know what I mean?
Right.
Burning trees that have fallen. And you know what I mean? You're going to, it's just, it's different. It's just different.
You
And, you know,
right,
and
you have to intentionally,
yes,
put yourself in the present instead of, I think in the
exactly.
past when you would just open up a beer and you'd be around all your friends who are drinking or whatever, it was almost like you didn't have to work to do it. But
Ooh,
there are
yeah,
ways to
yeah,
put yourself in the present,
yeah,
whether it be outside and you play a song that inspires you,
totally.
or you can even do it with creating content. I do it all
Mhm.
the time where I'm seeing something in nature and then I think to myself, wow, that would make a really that would make a really good metaphor or story. I mean, I did it yesterday when I was going through what is it, security. I saw how efficient this is so, oh, my nerd brain, but I saw how efficient the security was in Munich, like the way they do the airport security, and it was
Cool.
very wide open. And I just thought, wow, like why can't every airport do security? I didn't have to take anything out of my bag. It
Nice.
was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it was so amazing.
Yeah.
So I was immediately, I'm like, oh my God, there's a story there. There's a story about
I love that.
how you do an assembly line and the
Mhm,
smart way that you do it, and then the ease and the stress that
mhm.
you take away from passengers
Yeah.
just by those small steps in changing around your system, giving a little wider berth as you walk through security. And so what did I do? I snap my phone, I take a picture, and then I just store it in my mind of, oh, that's going to make a good story later on for
Mhm.
content. And those are the kinds of like things that anyone can do,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be present and to be a part of your environment. I did it one
Yes.
day when I was walking along the elevator runway. I saw this really cool thing with these screens and these people, and they would talk, and it was like little TV screens as you were walking along the elevator runway. And I thought, wow, that's so creative, and it was so easy. Like anyone
Right.
could have done that. And I'm
Right.
like, and then it got me thinking about how, like, do we all think that we're not creative? We are. They're
Mhm.
just,
Mhm.
creativity is so subjective, and so
Totally. Yeah.
anyway, so
Yeah.
there are ways that you can put yourself in the present. And I
Mhm.
think that's part, even like the conversation that we're having right now, it's totally present
Yeah.
and in the moment. And I think that that's what we have to all strive to work to do is how do we put ourselves in the moment and enjoy this time that we all have, because we all have a finite amount of time left. And
Definitely. Definitely.
so,
I love what you're saying is like you can recognize the creativity in yourself in moments like that, where normally if it's picture yourself going through that, you know, that same situation hungover, Do you think you would? I mean, maybe it would have registered, but you wouldn't have been like, so, okay, no, this is like inspiring to the point that I'm going to, maybe take a picture. You're focusing on how you can tell it as a story and help other people. You know what I mean? That wouldn't, all that kind of stuff. And that's what I always say too. Is like when people, how do you have fun? Right. And I was asking the same questions. I totally get it. Right. And what it is, it's like, we're like, it's boring. Like sober life is, no, it's just, it's calmer. Again, it's a choice of words. The volume's been turned down because you're not drinking your face off and getting reckless and woo, right? But it's calmer, and calm is good, because then you do start noticing those little things start speaking to you. You know what I mean? Like nature. I remember the first time I went camping. That's why I use that as my part. The lead up was, I used to just get bombed camping. Like I'd bring a flat of beer and it was a race to try and finish it. Right. And the first time I went out, I intentionally went by myself. And because I wanted some solitude, and I set up everything, and I'm like sitting there staring at the tree. I'm like, man, this is so, to me, I was like, at the time, I was like, this is so boring. This is, wow, this is such a different experience.
Right.
But then literally just me experiencing that in my nervous system and my body and my mind and everything. The next morning I woke up and I got it. I'm like, no, that was actually really enjoyable. And now I'm not hungover, you know what I mean? Baking in the sun as the sun's coming up at 7 a.m. And I can enjoy a nature walk. And then it was just that shift, right? And it was just realizing like, no, now I'm actually noticing like the birds singing aren't like annoying me, like I'm enjoying it, right? And so it's just really like readjusting your nervous system, and the story that you tell yourself about your life is so important to, the success of coming out the other side of an addiction.
Right. It's such a multifaceted, area of study. And I think that it's so important to have people like yourself who are really focused in on this one particular addiction, because of the fact that it's so universally accepted as culturally acceptable and something fun that we all should be doing. And to look at it in a different way takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of introspection about really what this is doing to us as a society, what it's doing to you as an individual, and how it's blocking you from doing some of the other things that you would be doing otherwise. And to that point, I know we'll just touch upon it briefly, and I'll refer to it in the show notes, but Andrew Huberman, he did a podcast about it. And I think one of my biggest takeaways of it was the fact that even casual drinking has many harmful health effects.
Yeah, I love that podcast. And yeah, that'd be great if you link that in there. We'd at least DM'd a little bit about this beforehand, so we knew going in we were going to talk about it. It's amazing. It is for just anybody that's drinking. It's, like a lot of the people that I work with are, obviously there's the spectrum, right? It's all relative. It's more so about how it's making them feel and how they want to feel, right? So it doesn't necessarily, that's the entry point. But having said that, there's a lot more of the heavier drinkers that I work with, versus just this idea that like, oh, well, everything in moderation. When you really think about it, and he beautifully breaks this down.
He breaks it down to like every part of your body.
Yeah.
Impacted by alcohol.
Yeah, literally, it can go anywhere in your body that it wants. It can pass the blood-brain barrier. It can just freely go through your organs. Even like, up here in Canada, Health Canada says like, we used to have like, 2 to 3 drinks a week is, we've like retracted that. It's like, no, 0 drinks a week is ideal. Right? All that, the so-called the health benefits, 1 beer a day or 1 glass of wine a day, like that's been retracted. Like that's not a thing anymore. You know what I mean? And it's essentially, if you really break it down, it's a carcinogen, it's a poison. So how do you really moderate that? And there's a lot of people that come at me at, TikTok or Instagram. Well, just drink moderately. And I think that's such a ambiguous, uninformed piece of quasi advice.
Who benefits
right.
from people saying drink moderately? Who benefited from saying 2 glasses of wine or a glass of wine a day?
Then they can still get that other, they got the heavy drinkers, and then they got the casual drinkers still too.
Right. They get everybody. They get everybody if they think it's cool. And then the other piece to it is that I do believe it, like you said, it arrests development. So when a bunch of young people have to get drunk out of their minds in order to socialize with one another, in order to date, I mean, what are we telling people? What is the message that young people are getting? Is that, I've got to be really, really drunk in order to connect with people. I can't connect with somebody without being drunk because I can't show you who I really am. I can't be my whole self
Yeah.
without alcohol. And
Yeah.
that's pretty damaging.
Exactly. And then on the other side of that is like, not only can I not be myself, my true self is when I have a few drinks, right? My optimal version of me is a few drinks in, which is kind of what we talked about earlier, right? Having that sort of as like the subtext of that as well is just like, so troubling. And to your point, like the amount of marketing that goes into alcohol is like, I don't have the stats, but it's in the billions, right? And obviously their target, just as many things, or like cigarettes back in the day, is towards younger people because they want the lifelong drinkers, right? So just knowing all this stuff is what it comes down to. And again, I'm not judging people. People will come on in comments and to say, hey, well, I drink and blah blah. I'm like, well, that's totally fine. Like, it doesn't hurt my feelings. I'm not telling you how to live your life by any means. I'm just but it's a discussion that's worth having. And I very much see a parallel between what cigarettes were. I mean, if you look back in like the 90s movies, Fight Club, every time there's
about to go there,
right? And so I think that drinking is going the way of the cigarette.
We're going to see it. I mean, we already see.
I think we already are.
That there's this mocktail menu, and
yes,
I was doing the mocktails for a while, but then I realized, like, oh my god, they're expensive. They're
just as expensive as
I mean, they're not as bad for your health, I guess. Fair. I would say. But the reason we're seeing that is that I think there is a shift, and I think that there's like the sober summer and other movements that are happening, and I think that it could be possible that one day we will see alcohol the way that we now see cigarettes, and I think that's a positive development. I mean, based on my experience. And again, like you say, you always got to caveat and say you're not judging the people that are still doing it, because I mean, we were both drinkers.
Hey, I was there, right? Absolutely.
Right. We understand why people do it, but for
time.
me and for you, I think it was the right decision. So tell me a little bit about how you help people. And I want to kind of close down the call with a little bit about your business and about how you, some of the services that you offer.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to do a little plug at the end here. So I'm lucky to work as a freelancer. I have the opportunity to build up my own thing. And I've also gotten integrated with a sober group, or alcohol-free group. We like to say alcohol-free coaches, and it's called Freedom from Alcohol. So the guy's name's Chris Shattuck. He's the CEO. And I ended up just mutual friend, started talking with him, and he had done very well to the point where I was like, just off our first meeting, I was like, hey, if you need an assistant coach, keep me in mind. And he was like, well, actually, I am getting to that point. I'm like, oh shit, that actually worked, right? So right place, right time, just right mix of personalities. We just got along from day one. So I'm working with him right now. So again, Freedom from Alcohol. It's a private Facebook group. So if you want to join that, it's Facebook groups, I want freedom from alcohol. So you can find us there. Great group, very interactive. So yeah, I've been doing work with the Freedom from Alcohol group. It's clients through that, and then have my own thing going on. So do a lot of like the one-on-one coaching. We also do group coaching as well. Again, the community aspect is, I think, imperative for this journey. And then we have an online course that we promote as well. So yeah, I've been doing. I love the one-on-one coaching.
This is your website right here. So if people want more information.
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I just put this up. Anybody that's doing the dry July, you mentioned the sober summer and that sort of thing. Dry July's a big thing. Yeah. So I got a 30-day challenge accountability kind of site that you can do that right now. I also have a free app on there as well, the alcohol free the first 7 days. So for people that are still just getting to that point where like, okay, you know what I mean? Investigating. If they're at that investigation stage, that's a perfect basically you're going to go through each day as a topic. One of the common topics of that first week: irritability, managing cravings, dealing with poor sleep. So it's just normalizing the process of that first 7 days, realize, okay, no, this does happen to not just to you, like there's other people that are going through it, and then sort of how to deal with it from there. So those are my my projects that I've been working on. And then once again, with the Freedom from Alcohol group is primarily where I've been doing it's just great having like a group of people, right? Because sometimes the solopreneur thing can get a little bit lonely, and I do get my own head a little bit about it. So to be in there with Lauren is the other assistant coach, myself, and then Chris is the CEO. The three of us are just, I think we're just doing some wonderful things.
No, that's awesome. I I love the fact that you focus on so many different aspects too of addiction. It isn't just and if we go on to your Instagram, but I'll just talk to it. It's really neat too how you've broken down like, okay, on day one you're going to feel like this. On day two
Yeah.
you're going to, because I think that people don't really understand that it's such a process. Like
Mhm.
you're going to feel differently about it depending on where you are in the journey. So
Definitely.
I think that's amazing. And
Thank you.
gosh, I'm just so happy that you took the time to talk with me today.
Yeah.
And is there anything else that you want to say to our audience, you know, as we close out the call, or anything that I didn't mention that you'd like to touch upon?
No, I think it's great. I just see my most active, like I'm fairly active on Instagram, but I say my TikTok channel for whatever reason has really done quite well. I'd always been laying off of TikTok a little
Mhm.
bit, sort of like a fear of the unknown more than anything.
Right.
But for whatever reason, this year has done very well. So and I'll send you the link to that because that seems to be my most active and interactive part for
Okay.
myself. So reach out to me anytime. I won't turn it into, you know what I mean? I'm here to help first and foremost, right? So I won't turn it into anything salesy. I get a lot of people reaching out to me on there, just simple, hey, I'm going through this. Is this normal? Blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I don't pretend to be a medical professional either. Like if there's something that I've been through that I can speak to, I will absolutely help you the best I can. And then if it's gotten you to a place where you're like, hey, I'm feeling good about this, and then you want to look at working together, we can go from there. But I promised anybody that's listening, if you want to reach out, I am very easy to get a hold of. And yeah, if you can link the TikTok
I will.
channel in there, that'd be brilliant. Other than that, just I'd say just be conscious about any addiction you have, but specific, we'll focus on alcohol because that's what we've been talking about. You know, the next time you have a drink, just be mindful. Just how is it actually making you feel? What was it that was part of your day that sort of drew you to that at the end of the day? Just like being more mindful about this habit. Is it serving you? Is it not serving you? You know, and that's really where it all starts. I guess the sober curious thing we call it, right? And just being more mindful about it. Is this serving you? Is this helpful to you? Is there something else that you can put in its place? And just going from there. Same thing that you would do with like a food that's not serving you, any real addiction, right? So that's all that I would like to kind of wrap up with is just be mindful of the drinking and see how it's making you feel and just question yourself about it.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much. I will meet you backstage to say goodbye as I close out the call, but I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to our audience today. Much of my audience is on LinkedIn, so I hope that I've been able to bring your message forward on that channel as well,
Great. Yeah.
because I
Thank
think
you.
what you're doing is absolutely amazing, and I think that there needs to be more information out there like this because it's certainly something that is so ingrained in military culture
Yeah.
that I would love to see be less of an emphasis as the years go by. So thank you
Mhm.
very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And thanks to your audience as well. And yeah, absolute pleasure to be on the show.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks, Matt. And like I said, I'll meet you backstage. I'll go full screen. But thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. I do have another show this Thursday. I'll be talking to another military criminal defense attorney. He also does a lot of those inspector general cases that I say we talk about a lot in terms of like the justice system and due process. So I'm really excited to dive into some of his experiences with military justice and some of the people that he's represented and some of the things that he thinks we could be doing to ensure that people are treated fairly and that they have a voice in the process. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. As I always say to close out the call, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye now.